First story, The Silent Shadow. I never thought I'd remember that night so vividly, but here I am, sitting alone in my apartment 20 years later, still haunted by what happened. I was just a child back then, no older than 12, living in a small house on the edge of Crestwood, a quiet town just outside of Seattle. My parents had always warned me about the things I shouldn't do: stay up too late, venture into the woods alone, or, the worst of all, ignore the strange sounds that would come from the dark corners of the house. It all started one night when I woke up to the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't a noise or a movement. It was the silence. The kind that presses against your ears and makes everything feel heavy. I turned my head toward the corner of my room, where the shadows always seemed thicker. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe it was just a pile of clothes or a piece of furniture that I hadn't noticed before. But no, this wasn't a chair or a blanket. It was tall, far taller than any person I had ever seen, and it stood perfectly still in the corner. The darkness around it seemed to cling to its shape, making it hard to see any details. My heart began to race as I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, but something deep inside me knew it wasn't. I blinked, and that's when it moved. Slowly, like it was testing the air. Then it spoke. Its voice was like a whisper, but not one that came from a human throat. It was deep, almost guttural, like something scraping against bone. "I've been waiting," it said. I froze, unable to move. My body refused to listen to me. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My mind was shouting at me to run, but I couldn't. Then, in an instant, it lunged toward me. I barely had time to react. Its cold, clammy hands grabbed my shoulders, and its breath was foul, like something decayed. I tried to scream, but it was as if the air was being sucked out of the room. I felt its fingers digging into my skin, and I could see its face now. If you could even call it a face. It was a grotesque mash of features, like it had been stitched together from nightmares. I screamed, and suddenly, the light flicked on. My parents burst into the room, looking at me with wide, confused eyes. But when they saw my face, they didn't ask questions. The fear in my eyes was enough. They called the priest. They called anyone they could think of, but no one could explain what had happened. The house was blessed, the windows sealed, and everything was supposed to go back to normal. Except it didn't. The scars stayed with me, the ones on my shoulders where the thing had touched me, the ones on my heart. Even 20 years later, I can feel them. Sometimes in the dead of night, when everything is quiet again, I think I can hear that voice. I've been waiting. But that's not what brings me here, sitting alone in this dark room, fingers trembling on the keyboard. No, what brings me here is what happened last week. I moved. I moved to a new house in a different part of town, a place where no one knew me. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could escape it all. But one night, as I lay in bed, half asleep, I heard it again. That same silence, that same pressure in the air. My heart skipped a beat, and I didn't need to look. I didn't need to see it. I could feel it. I turned slowly toward the corner of the room, and there it was. The same shape, the same shadow, the same darkness surrounding it. My breath caught in my throat, and I swear, for a second, I saw its face again, those horrible twisted features. But this time, it didn't speak. This time it was closer, almost as if it had never left. And as I sat there trembling, staring into that corner, I knew, no matter how far I ran, no matter how many years passed, it would always find me. Second story, The House on Elm Street. It was a warm summer evening in 1998 when I first noticed the house, the one on Elm Street, right next to the old cemetery. I was just a kid then, maybe 11 or 12, and I spent most of my time riding my bike through the quiet streets of our small town, Millfield, Ohio. But this house, it was different. I had passed it 1,000 times before, but that day, something about it felt off. The air felt colder around it, and I could have sworn I saw a shadow move behind the curtains of the upstairs window. I'd heard stories from the older kids. They said the house was haunted, that the last people who lived there had disappeared without a trace. Everyone whispered about it, but no one ever dared to go near it. Of course, being the curious kid I was, I couldn't resist. The next afternoon, I rode my bike there again. I don't know why I went back, but something was pulling me. The sun was starting to set, and the house stood eerily still, like it had been waiting for me. I parked my bike by the rusted gate and walked up the path, which was overgrown with weeds. My heart raced with excitement and fear. I shouldn't have been here, but I pushed on. I knocked on the door, hoping someone would answer, but the only sound I heard was the faint creak of the floorboards from inside. When no one came, I decided to check around back. There was a small door in the back, barely hanging on its hinges. I tried it, and to my surprise, it creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with dust. The walls were lined with old portraits, their eyes staring at me with an unsettling intensity. I could almost hear the whispers in the air, like the house was alive, waiting for something. I walked deeper into the house, my footsteps echoing in the silence. Every room I passed felt colder, darker. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That's when I heard it. A voice, low and guttural, coming from the basement. "Help me," it whispered, barely audible, but unmistakable. I froze. My mind raced. Was it a person, a trapped animal, or something else? Against all logic, I found myself walking toward the basement door. The old wooden steps creaked as I descended, each step echoing through the empty house. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. The air was damp, and the smell of mold filled my nose. I could barely make out the shape of something in the corner, hunched over. I took a step closer. Then, it turned. The thing in the corner wasn't human. It had hollow, dark eyes that seemed to pierce into my soul. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones, and its fingers, long, bony claws, twitched as if it wanted to reach out and grab me. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. But before I could turn to run, the door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. The creature's voice filled the room again, but this time it was louder, clearer. "You shouldn't have come here," it hissed. "Now, you're mine." I scrambled to my feet, but my body wouldn't obey. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The creature's eyes glowed with a sinister light as it slowly crawled toward me. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, each beat like a countdown. And then, everything went black. I woke up outside the house, lying in the grass. My bike was beside me, still resting by the rusted gate. But it felt wrong. The house was gone, not demolished, not burned. Just disappeared. There was no trace of it, as if it had never existed. I've never been back to Elm Street. And every time I close my eyes, I still hear that voice echoing in the dark. "You shouldn't have come here." Dear viewers, before we start the next horror story, I want to say, if you wish, you can support this YouTube channel financially through the details on the screen or in the description below the video. Thank you for your attention. Third story. The shadows under the bed. I remember the old house on Elm Street in Arkansas. It was a crumbling relic of a time long forgotten, with creaky wooden floors and walls that seemed to groan every time the wind blew through the trees outside. My family had moved there when I was 10. My parents were looking for a fresh start, and the low rent on the house seemed too good to pass up. But from the very first night, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it. At first, it was just little things. A shadow flickering out of the corner of my eye, the faint sound of footsteps when no one was there. But when I started seeing figures under my bed, it became clear. My room, the one at the end of the hall, was the worst. It was always colder than the rest of the house, and the light bulb in the ceiling would flicker every time I tried to sleep. One night, I decided to confront whatever was lurking under my bed. The floor creaked as I slowly crawled out of bed and knelt down to peek under. At first, I saw nothing, just the usual mess of old shoes and forgotten toys. But then, I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like fingernails dragging against the wood. My heart pounded in my chest as I scooted further under the bed. I was almost close enough to see when a cold hand grabbed my wrist, pulling me down. I screamed, but the hand held tight, dragging me deeper under the bed. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with dust and the smell of something rotten. It wasn't just a hand, it was something else, something inhuman. I could feel its cold breath on my face like it was trying to inhale me. I struggled, kicking and thrashing, but it was too strong. Then everything went still. I couldn't hear anything, couldn't see anything. The world felt like it had stopped moving altogether. And then, just as suddenly, I was back in my bed. My heart was racing, and my clothes were soaked with sweat. I sat up, my breath shallow, and looked around. Nothing seemed out of place. The room was normal again, quiet, still, almost too still. But I knew better now. The house had a secret, a darkness that it wanted to keep hidden, and I was its newest victim. Over the next few weeks, the visions grew stronger. The shadows under my bed became more frequent, the cold hand more insistent. I began hearing whispers too, like someone was calling my name from the dark corners of the house. Every night, it was the same. The shadows would stretch out from under the bed, creeping up my legs, whispering in my ear. One night, I decided to leave. I packed a bag, sneaking out of my room, but as I reached the front door, I saw something that stopped me cold. Standing in the hallway was a figure, a pale, twisted thing with hollow eyes and a mouth that stretched far too wide. It was smiling at me, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that you see on a predator just before it strikes. I ran back to my room and locked the door, but it didn't matter. The thing was already there, waiting. The shadows under the bed had stretched out, and the thing was waiting to pull me in again. This time, there would be no escape. The last thing I remember was the cold hand wrapping around my ankle, dragging me into the darkness, and hearing my own scream echo in the emptiness. I never made it out of that house, and no one ever heard from me again. They say the house is still there on Elm Street, but nobody dares go near it. The shadows still linger, waiting for their next victim. Maybe, just maybe, if you're brave enough to look under the bed, you'll see me there too.